So my first question will be, you were here in autumn, now
Yes.
we are in the beginning of spring. What do you think about our winter and how do we seem to you this spring?
Well, I read all about the winter in the English media, and my feeling coming here this week is if you can survive that winter, you can survive anything, because it clearly was a terrible time. Putin is on a losing, he is losing in a sense. What can he achieve? I mean, it's terrible, there'll be more death, more suffering, but his campaign is going nowhere. And the resilience, I mean, it's a cliche in the Western media, but the resilience of the Ukrainians is extraordinary. Although it's also, there is no alternative, you know, which in a sense makes it easier to be resilient, perhaps. But I'm amazed. I mean, I do not see any, well, if anything, people are almost a little bit more optimistic somehow. I think there's a sense of achievement at having come through the winter, so -20 with no electricity. But maybe it's just the spring sunshine, you know. Spring brings hope, and we all feel more optimistic and cheerful when spring comes.
You actually, during this visit, said the word hope many, many, many times. Talk to me about the concept of hope.
Well, as a doctor, I know that hope is one of our most powerful drugs. It is amazing what we as human beings will tolerate if we hope there is light at the end of a tunnel. Or even if we're dying, to hope we may live one more day. Hope is absolutely central to human existence. I think I wrote in one of my books, I said, life without hope is hopelessly difficult, although in the end, hope makes fools of us all. But hope, in my opinion, is not as a rational assessment of the future. Hope is a moral duty. We have a duty to be hopeful, to be optimistic, because it means we have a duty to try to make things better. Hope by itself is not enough. It is, as the philosophers say, necessary but not sufficient. If you are hopeful but do nothing to make the world better, then it will not work. But once you stop having hope, then you give up, and then the worst will happen. So hope is a moral duty. And even if it's only to hope to live one more day or do one more little thing, we must move forward and hope we have a future.
As a medical doctor, where is this margin between not giving too much hope, saying the truth, at the same time giving some hope?
Well, it's very difficult, but I mean, I'm not a palliative care doctor, but I have looked after dying patients, including members of my own family. And often when we are dying, in effect, losing hope, we develop a sort of split personality. Part of us knows we're dying, part of us somehow hopes we'll live longer. And it's as though you're talking to two different people. So you have to be realistic with them, but then you don't sort of, we say in English, rub their face in it, and you talk about the weather or what's happening tomorrow, and you don't talk too much about death. So it's psychologically quite complicated. The fundamental truth in medicine is you must never lie to patients, but you must never deprive them of hope. And sometimes that's difficult, and sometimes what I call therapeutic lies, I think, are justified. I always worried with the patients I treated with malignant brain tumors, glioblastomas, where we know that 50% of people will be dead within a year, maybe 5% live 5 years, but it's very unusual. And of course, in the days of the internet, everybody now looks up the prognosis on the internet, so that complicates things. But in principle, I would tell people, look, if you're unusually lucky, you could be alive in 5 years' time. If you're unusually unlucky, you might be dead in 6 months' time. So you need to get your affairs in order. And in between these two extremes, the tumor will grow back, but hopefully we can give you more treatment. All of which is true, but it's all a bit optimistic. You know, it's slanting things in an optimistic direction. But whether that was the right approach or not, I don't know, because patients or their families rarely tell you afterwards. And I was always worried if I was too gloomy and pessimistic with these patients, they would spend what little time they have left in a state of depression. And certainly in my own case with advanced prostate cancer, although it is at the moment still in remission after 6 years, I don't know for how much longer, I've wasted so much time worrying about what will happen. It achieves nothing. You know, you have to learn to stop worrying about the future, not hoping you'll be cured and live forever, because none of us live forever, but concentrating on the next few weeks or the next few months ahead. It has been hard work for me to overcome this primitive fear and to stop worrying about what will happen, because we all know what will happen one day. I'm 76 years old. It's different if you're young. You know, dying from cancer when you're younger is a totally different question from dying at my age.
I actually would say you're a very calm person. You even slept through the missile attacks.
Well, that's rather... I'm both proud and disappointed. For my shame, I was quite looking forward to hearing some bangs, and I've been through one missile attack on my previous visit. So no, it's very funny, because I have to text my wife in England every morning to reassure her everything's okay. So I texted her, say, a very quiet night, you know, nothing happened. And then I was told it had been one of the noisiest nights yet. So I thought that was very funny.
Being famous is very much tempting for the personality. You are very famous. I saw yesterday the line of 1 hour and a half of students who were trying to sign the books with you, making photographs of you, but at the same time you remain very modest person. What do you think about this temptation of big success and fame?
My wonderful wife, who's an anthropologist, likes to joke and say, it's a very good thing, because I'm famous in England as well, it's a very good thing you only became famous in old age. If you'd become famous when you were a young man, you would be unbearable. And of course we see this with rock stars and actors and members of the British royal family, where fame can ruin people, you know, it's very damaging. But I have mixed feelings about it. I mean, I'm pleased people like the books I've written. I realize that celebrity, being famous, becomes sort of, you're famous because you're famous, and people want to be photographed with you just because you're famous, not necessarily because I wrote some good books. But I'm a very self-critical person, so I don't think it has done me any harm. I'm slightly embarrassed by it in many ways, but so many of the Ukrainian medical students are beautiful young girls. I find it quite funny. Here I am, an old man, being surrounded by admiring beautiful young Ukrainian girls. So it's quite funny. But the important thing, the difficult thing, is if you are famous, you must put it to good use. You should not lie in the bathtub of fame enjoying it. You have to say, well, I have a voice, people listen to me, I must try to put that to good use and make it useful. And that's a serious, serious question.
One of the things you are using your voice for in Ukraine were advice to doctors and to young doctors. And one of the things you were saying in the lectures, and even the slide I remember, was like, ask for help.
Yes.
Why is it important?
Medicine is dangerous by its very nature. All of us, all human beings make mistakes, even if they're very well trained. I always quote in my lectures on patient safety the examples of some terrible aeroplane crashes where very skilled, very highly trained pilots made terrible mistakes, because we have what the Nobel Prize winner Herbert Simon called bounded rationality. We are not Mr. Spock. We are, and Gaynor Kahneman's psychological work, we are not reasoning machines. We are very influenced by emotions and feelings. And when we are in a stressful situation, such as an aeroplane pilot when something is going wrong with the aeroplane, or as a surgeon when you're having difficulty in an operation or when you're having difficulty having to make a rapid decision. We can very easily make mistakes because we do not think calmly and rationally and analytically. So other people who are not in the thick and not in the middle of the stressful situation do not have my emotional, they're called cognitive biases, are better at seeing my mistakes than I am seeing them. And if you have difficult decisions to make, if you have a good colleague you can discuss them with, you're more likely to make the right decision. So having, for me, modern medicine, safe medicine, is no longer about great heroic individuals, which is the sort of historic model of medicine, these great heroes, Pasteur, Lister, Cushing in neurosurgery, great individuals who made great discoveries. Modern medicine is no longer like that. Modern medicine is about careful teamwork, people helping each other. I'm not saying we need to be ambitious individuals, but we need to understand our limits and know when to seek help.
When you were speaking in the lecture about teamwork, you said that it's as well a bit dangerous because you are sometimes trying to be very much of a team player. I mean,
Yes,
not personally
yes.
you, but anybody.
Oh yeah, no, everything is a balance. You know, teamwork is not a magic wand which makes all problems go away. Teams can make mistakes, just as individual doctors can make mistakes. So an effective team is one where there is disagreement, constructive disagreement, and then it becomes a question of good leadership, that a good leader will make sure the conflict is positive and ends up with a good conclusion, rather than just, in the case of surgeons sort of shouting at each other. So part of teamwork is good leadership, but the modern progressive model of good leadership, and this is as much in business as in medicine, is one where the leader supports the team, empowers the team, and is not it's an inverted triangle, not a dictatorial triangle where the guy on top is shitting on everybody below him.
You were saying that you have some meetings in your hospital in the mornings.
Yes.
What is special about those meetings?
It's unusual in England. I'm not quite sure why, but many years ago, I thought it would be a good idea to have a meeting every morning at 8 o'clock with some of the senior doctors, most of them, and all the trainees, where we look at the patients who've been admitted, usually urgently, over the previous 24 hours, and then we discuss how to treat them. And it's a sort of Socratic, when I created them, and I still go to the meetings. I'm very happy that after I retired 5 years ago, the meetings have continued. And it's a sort of Socratic process where I, as a senior doctor, would ask the trainees what they think, ask them to explain it, and a sort of backwards and forwards discussion. And because this is about patients before we have actually treated them, we don't know what will happen, so you can have a much more open discussion of the possibilities. And with so many medical problems, whether it's surgical or medical, there are many options and possibilities. There is rarely just one right answer. For every diagnosis, there is what we call in English the differential diagnosis. There is a list of possibilities, and I've always tried to train my trainees not to try to come up immediately with the right answer, but to discuss all the possibilities and then say why they think one of those is the right answer. If you try to jump to the right answer, sometimes you'll make terrible mistakes.
During this visit of yours, I suddenly realized we have the same passion for the Sherlock Holmes book.
Oh yes, I love Sherlock Holmes.
Do you remember when you first time got your hands on this book?
Gosh, I must be
what
very
was your
young.
favorite story?
Probably 11 or 12 years old. I think what I love is all the opening paragraph where he describes the weather, and it was 1884, and and Holmes it's all the details. The actual plot story matters less. Some of the plots are very clever. I suppose the one I always remember, because it's very frightening, is The Speckled Band,
Oh, with
the
the
story
snake,
about
yeah.
the snake. I mean, it's such a good story. But it's the whole, in fact, you know Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson and all the familiar details, which I think is delightful. So I know all the stories, and sometimes at bedtime reading, I like reading them again.
Speaking about reading, you surprised me very much because you said that in the difficult times, recent difficult times which you had, you read Tolkien again.
Yes, well, my brother, who was older than me and very, very close friend, died a few weeks ago. We grew up together in Oxford in the 1950s. When Tolkien was still alive, he was a professor in one of the colleges. And in those days, the Lord of the Rings was a bit of a sort of secret among Oxford university families.
So it was not published?
It is published, but not. It wasn't a world. It was 10 years later. It became as a worldwide phenomenon. And my older sister had the first edition of the first 3 volumes, which is now worth thousands of pounds, although they're very battered and well read. And when I was younger, I used to reread Tolkien quite often. I did not like the movie version of it. I found that a bit of a travesty. And I hadn't read it, I hadn't looked at Tolkien for 30 years. But when my brother died and I was very depressed, sad, I then reading Tolkien took me back to our very happy childhood together in Oxford, sort of 65, 70 years ago.
How Oxford of these days is different from your childhood?
Full of tourists. It's become a major tourist destination. So it's only an hour by train from London. And it is just packed with Chinese and Japanese and now Indian tourists. And it suffers a bit as a result. It's just crowded all the time, all the year. And it's difficult not to resent that a bit. I mean, it's the same problem in Barcelona and Venice. At least Venice can control the tourists a bit more because it's an island. I don't know what the answer is. I mean, there's no easy answer to it. But mass tourism, it tends to destroy the very beauty for which the tourists have come.
Do people who come from Oxford recognize each other? For example, if you are somewhere...
Well, by the way I talk, yes. If I... Oxford or Cambridge, I speak a very, very, it's called received pronunciation, RP. It's not necessarily so fashionable now. The BBC tries to have presenters of regional northern or west country accents. But as soon as I open my mouth, people will know that I went to Oxford University, but in fact I grew up in Oxford as well.
Loss. Talk to me about loss. How do you survive loss?
Well, in my brother's case, I mean, losing a sibling is different from losing a parent. I mean, we grieve when our parents die, but it feels more in the natural order of things. And your parents had their own life before you entered their life. My brother and I were very, very close. We were very, very different, completely different personalities. I am restless, energetic, anxious, driven. He was very peaceful, very calm, very modest, a very, very talented, a really talented artist, although he did not work as an artist professionally. So, and I was able to see him every day. He died at home from the complications of treatment for esophageal cancer. And he lived quite near me in London, so I went to see him almost every day before he died, and I saw him just the day before he died, which is important. There was a strange feeling. We have this word in English for a sinkhole. Sometimes a great hole appears in the ground if there's a mine underneath or a cave, and suddenly a great big hole appears. And it felt as though a sinkhole had suddenly appeared, but not in front of me, but within myself, because he and I had grown up together, and I suddenly had all these memories of our time together in the past. which in a sense, well, I hadn't lost them, but just it was a tremendous feeling of a hole. But he died at home. He did not die in pain. He had a very difficult time medically, but he bore it with extraordinary patience and grace. As a doctor, I know that having a good death is incredibly important, both for the person dying and for the family. It's why, with my wonderful friend Dr. Rachel Clark, who's probably England's most famous palliative care doctor, she's been to Ukraine with me several times, and we started a charity to support palliative care doctors in Ukraine. And I hope to be back, well, I will be back here in June with her to promote the charity a bit. So palliative care is a very important part of medicine. Traditionally, and I suspect it happens here in Ukraine, but you would know better than me, that once doctors feel they cannot help patients any longer, they just sort of push them away. Time to die, nothing to do with me. But in fact, a very important part of good medicine is that people should die well, which means not just free of pain, but peacefully with their various symptoms treated. And it's difficult in Ukraine because people here still, rather like in England 50 or 60 years ago, find it very difficult to talk about death. They get very upset. English patients, on the whole, want to be told the truth. And there is a strong feeling among English doctors we have an obligation to tell people if they have a fatal illness and they're going to die. It seems to be a bit more difficult here, and the family will say you mustn't tell the patient, you mustn't upset them. Although usually if people are dying, they know it. You can tell from the expression on the doctor's face. So it's partly a cultural problem. It'll probably change in time. But certainly palliative care, in England palliative care means looking after people who are dying, and that's all. Here palliative care is more like being in a nursing home, looking after people who can no longer need specific medical treatment. But care of the dying is a very important part of medicine.
What's the most surprising or funny or strange story about Ukraine during the war? For example, for me, the recent one about the guy who was considered to be dead by the DNA test, and then came back. It's absolutely beautiful story.
There were sort of medieval folk stories of similar, and he got $200,000. Yes, I think that is one of the funniest stories I've heard. Can I think of anything else? Well, not easily, because it's all rather dwarfed by the awful tragedy of the war, you know. But I know death is everywhere. It's the sun shining, there's cars on the street. So it's only superficially life looks normal in the daytime. And I know the reality is completely different. But the fact that Ukraine is still here, it has a future, is just extraordinary. And I think the Western media is starting to wake up to that. You know, an awful lot of the main media commentators have been kind of dismissing Ukraine and the great Russian steamroller, and people I think are starting to realize that that's not true. You know, Ukraine has survived and will continue to survive. But having said that, who knows what will happen? I mean, it's impossible to predict. And then we have the disaster in the Middle East.
You lived in Oxford till you were 10, and
yes.
then you moved to London.
Then moved to London,
How
yes.
London of those days was different from Oxford, in your perception of a kid?
Much less traffic. Mm-hmm. There's an awful lot more traffic. Otherwise, not a big difference, I don't think. Not a big difference like Oxford now, full of tourists.
Did you like it, London?
No, not really.
Do you like it now?
A bit. And I go everywhere by bicycle. I no longer have a car, so there's some good bicycle routes in London. But on the whole, I don't like big cities. And my home in Oxford, it was a very old 16th century house, beautiful old house, with a very large garden, with an orchard, with 60 apple trees on the outskirts of Oxford, surrounded by fields. It was a complete paradise, and being dragged out of that to be dumped in. And also I went to the school I went to in Oxford, was very free, it was not hierarchical. You did not say sir to the teachers. They're all known by their nickname. So Mr. Ingram was Inky, and you say Inky, you wouldn't say sir. And then I had to go to a much more conventional school in London where I had to wear a uniform and say sir and wear a cap, and I hated it. I'm by nature a bit of a rebel. I don't like authority.
Your mom was German.
Yes.
Does this influence your attitude to immigrants, for example, from your very childhood?
Yes, I think so. I was always brought up in the atmosphere that on the whole, immigrants are a good thing. Simple as that. And of course, all the Western economies need immigrants. They do the jobs the local people don't want to do. And I mean, 30% of the staff in the National Health Service are immigrants in England.
Did you ever feel when you were a kid that your mom is badly treated by people because she is a German?
No. She says that when she first came to England in 1939, she had some problems with some members of my father's family. But she spoke perfect English. You would not know she was German. And except on the telephone, somehow the telephone somehow brought out a German accent. And she was a very reserved, disciplined person of a strong sense of duty in the sort of German Prussian tradition. So no, I don't think she ever encountered any prejudice, not that she told me about. Her problem, if anything, was she had a slight, I think, though I never discussed it with her, she had what we call survivor guilt, because she ran away from Germany. She was in trouble with the Gestapo, and the two friends who had been denounced with her for having anti-Hitler opinions were sent to prison. And I think she felt in some ways she had betrayed them by running away. But I never discussed that with her.
Where did she meet your father?
In Germany. My father was always a great internationalist. He was a lawyer, and he spoke good French with a terrible accent, and he wanted to learn German. And he went to Germany in 1936 to Halle, and there my mother was also in the same lodgings because she had refused to join the Bund das Deutsche Mädel, the women's equivalent to the Hitler Youth. So she could not go to university, which normally she would have done. She came from a very well-educated family. So she was training as a bookseller, which is the next best thing to going to a university. And she met my father in lodgings. I don't know if they exactly fell in love, but certainly my father was the first person my mother could talk to openly about the fact she knew the Nazis were bad. Which is interesting, because I don't know where she learnt that, because her sister was an enthusiastic Nazi. Her brother became a Luftwaffe Messerschmitt fighter pilot. Her father was dead. Her mother, I think, was sort of neutral. But my mother just knew that the Nazis were wrong, which is remarkable, because nobody else, not many other people, were saying that openly at the time. And then when she got into trouble with the Gestapo, my father thought, well, I'll have to marry her to bring her to England so she can escape. So that was the basis of the marriage. And it was very successful. It lasted sort of 60, 70 years.
You published a book about your mother?
Well, in my third book, the last few pages are about her, yes. Because when I was diagnosed with cancer, and I thought I might be dead quite soon because the early signs were bad, I have a photograph of my mother as a child on the wall, and I was just sort of looking at her and thinking there was a strange sense of time stopping. And I was looking at my mother when she was 9 years old, and I was looking at her thinking I might not have much longer time to live myself. And it's this strange sense of time, not exactly stopping, but in Einsteinian physics, physicists talk of block time, that time, the past, present, and future, are all together, just like this cup is here and that cup is there. So in physics, now is here, tomorrow is there, yesterday is all present at once. And I had this very strange feeling looking into the eyes of my mother at the age of 9, of his sense of sort of eternity. It was just a very deep thought, neither good nor bad, but just very, very powerful. And it brought some consolation.
From all the people I know, you're one of the very big romantic people.
Yes, I'm an idealist. I'm an idealist.
How
yes.
come?
My parents, my upbringing. I mean, my parents were both sincere, not severe, but sincere, relaxed Christians. I'm not. I have no religious faith. But I believe passionately, we are here to try to make the world a better place. We are not here just to make money and buy things. I like making money, I like buying things, but it's ultimately not very useful. And there are many ways of making the world a better place. In some ways, medicine is the easiest one. Just by going to work and doing your job, you help people. But you can make the world a better place by helping the environment, by looking after animals, keeping bees, as I do. I love my bees. So it's all about life, promoting life, rather than ownership and expensive holidays and firing guns and invading countries. So that is very deep for me. We are here to try to make the world a better place. And medicine is only one way among others of doing that. And it's a great privilege doctors have, and they can become corrupted by it and be terribly pleased with themselves. It's a moral luxury.
Being a doctor, and especially being a doctor in Ukraine, but not only, you have all the time to go through some very severe dilemmas. For example, to be honest or not.
Yes.
With patients
Yes.
or with colleagues, which
Yes.
is even sometimes more difficult. I don't know, what according to you are the most difficult dilemmas of the doctors?
The most difficult dilemma of all is saying sorry to patients when you've made a mistake and things have gone wrong. That is so difficult, it's almost impossible. And many doctors won't do it because you're somehow suddenly, the emperor has no clothes. You have all these, as a surgeon particularly, you have this sort of divine regalia. You look amazing, you're fantastic, and then to actually say, well, I made a mistake, it is incredibly difficult. You feel totally naked and exposed. But if you can do that on the occasions when things have gone badly, certainly in England, I'm amazed how often I was forgiven. Not always. And there are certainly some patients and families who hate me. There was a BBC documentary about me last year. Did you see it? Possibly not.
Not yet.
In which, by chance, while the documentary was being made, I met the mother of a patient of mine on the street. There is a child who died with a brain tumor, and I did the operation. I was young and inexperienced, and in fact it was a very malignant tumor, a very rare one I hadn't come across before. And it was a very difficult operation all around the brainstem. So I was very pleased with myself at I thought I'd removed all the tumor. And the boy came back a few months later with what was clear evidence of the tumor growing back. And I went like that. I refused to get the boy scanned, even though the parents said, we think something's the matter. And then, of course, eventually he did have a scan, and it showed the tumor had come back. He would have died anyway, even if I'd not pretended everything was all right. And the mother had stopped me, and then she ended up being filmed in the documentary. And there was an incredibly moving scene where she was telling me how she had spent 25 years hating me. And now that she had met me and I'd talked to her, and the fact I remembered the boy's name immediately when she said, I'm Duncan Panner's mother. And I said, oh yes, I remember exactly. And the fact I remembered immediately, she understood that I was actually very, very sad about it. And there's a very, very moving scene when we're all reconciled to each other. And she said it was wonderful to get rid of this 25 years of hatred for me. Powerful
so the
scene.
fact that you are not indifferent mattered to her.
Yes, the fact I cared, yeah.
You were saying several times during this visit, like, oh, we had this 50 years ago, or this was the same in British medicine 50 years ago.
Yeah.
What happened? Why did it change? Was
Good question.
just
I think
evolution?
broader cultural change of less deference to authority. No, and probably more education of patients. But it wasn't just in medicine, it was in society as a whole, and the media became more critical of doctors, and there were stories about bad doctors in the papers. And doctors were no longer seen as gods.
Should doctors be challenged, and if yes, then how?
Well, it's always a bad idea to upset doctors. You've got to be very polite. Every so often friends of mine ask, non-medical friends ask for advice. They want a second opinion. So I say, well, look, you've got to be very polite and say, I really do trust you so much, but my wife or my friends say you must go and get a second opinion. Really, doctor, I don't really want a second opinion, but I do need one just because of my wife. So you have to be very, very diplomatic about it, because most doctors are very insecure. We get very frightened if people don't trust us.
In Ukraine, quite often there is a problem when you see your colleague is doing an absolutely non-evidence-based thing. And I asked you in one of the interviews whether we should talk to patients about it, but what should you do to a colleague about it? What do you do if it is the same hospital?
It's so difficult. And I've seen some terrible, terrible mistakes here in Ukraine. There are many good doctors, but, well, let's put it politely, it's not that they're bad doctors. There are some doctors who've been very badly trained or haven't been properly trained at all. So they're not necessarily bad people, but they're badly trained doctors. Well, if you do nothing about it, if it's a serious mistake and you do nothing about it, you are colluding in that mistake. And you are blackening yourself a bit. But how you deal with it, I mean, in an ideal world, you talk to your colleague and say, look, I think that wasn't the right way of doing things. And of course in England and probably Europe and America we have morbidity and mortality meetings where bad results are openly, in theory, are openly discussed every month. All the bad outcomes, the deaths and the morbidity are discussed, and you try to come up with a non-blaming approach and say, what will we do differently next time? What have we learnt from this? But they're difficult to run well. It's very tempting to brush problems under the carpet. And it depends upon good leadership. A senior surgeon needs to run the morbidity and mortality meeting in a neutral, constructive way and create a non-judgmental atmosphere. And I don't know if there's anything remotely like that in Ukrainian surgical departments at the moment.
Funerals. Do doctors ever go to the patient's funerals?
I never did. Don't think I did. No, I didn't. Many Ukrainian doctors here have much closer relationships with their patients than we do in England. Whether that's because in England we're all rather reserved and we avoid emotional scenes, or whether it's a deeper cultural reason, I don't know. I don't know what happens in other European countries. But I know some doctors in England who have been to patients' funerals. But I never did, and I was never asked. It's not really expected of you.
we were coming here to the studio discussing success, and
Yes.
the success of cardiologists, you said, is much more easy to calculate.
Of cardiothoracic surgery is binary,
yeah.
yes, yes.
So tell more about it. What is the success of the neurosurgeon, and what is the success
Well, it's
of
very
somebody
difficult
else?
as the answer, because there are infinite degrees of brain damage, firstly. And yes, if somebody has a major stroke and is left completely paralyzed, then it's fairly obvious. I mean, death in neurosurgery in a patient who's otherwise well is there's lots of death, but it's head injuries, catastrophic hemorrhages, where death is to be expected. Unexpected deaths are unusual, they're not very many. In England now, every time there is an unexpected death, there should be an inquiry within the hospital to review it. How well it happens, I'm not sure. It depends on how well the hospital is run.
With regard to criminal and non-criminal, we have a case which is very public, which is related to our friends in Odessa Clinic.
Yes.
And it's being discussed in media here and there and everywhere, and doctors are talking about it on Facebook because they got home arrests, night arrests, all kinds of these things. So according to you, does it make sense to criminally?
No, I think it's a bad idea. So this is a very complicated question, because in England we talk about the civil law and the criminal law. The civil law is when you sue somebody for money. There's no question of prison. You simply are saying, this person has harmed me and I want financial compensation. And then the judge and lawyers will argue about it. Criminal law is when if you've actually committed a crime. In England, on the whole, until a few years ago, the only times doctors were prosecuted under the criminal law was for sort of gross negligence, for murder, for
deliberate
deliberate things, yes. But for clinical error, for carelessness, people have been reluctant to prosecute. But a few years ago, there were two cases. One was a consultant surgeon who delayed treating a patient with peritonitis from appendicitis. The other was a young junior doctor who missed sepsis in a child. And both these people were sent to prison. And there was absolute uproar from the medical profession. And then they went to appeal, and in both cases the appeal court turned over, the two doctors were released. And I think probably since then the prosecution, it's called the Crown Prosecution Office, has realized that using the criminal law for clinical error is probably a bad idea, because it depends upon finding other doctors to say this was gross negligence. And there are other ways, certainly, of punishing doctors. I'm ashamed of bad publicity. They can lose their license. So there are many ways short of sending people to prison to hold doctors, to hold them to whatever the phrase is. But the problem is there's more and more civil litigation. 3%, it's about £3 billion a year of the British National Health Service is now spent on litigation, defending the National Health Service from lawyers. And of that £3 billion, 40% is just going to the lawyers for reading all the documents and arguing. So I think Ukraine needs to think very carefully about how to have some kind of legal redress. Because if doctors do not get into trouble for behaving badly or making mistakes, that's bad for them. They will not learn. If you can treat somebody carelessly or not very well, and it doesn't matter, and it doesn't hurt you at all, you are less likely to learn from it. In New Zealand and Sweden, they have automatic no-fault compensation. If you go into hospital and are damaged, you do not have to prove a doctor made a mistake. The fact of the matter is it suffered harm, and you get automatic compensation. But of course that's expensive. It's paid for from taxation. In the case of Sweden, it's on the back of very generous social welfare payments anyway. But the great advantage of no-fault compensation is that you don't have to spend millions, billions of dollars to lawyers to argue about whether a doctor made a mistake or not. And also in terms of natural justice, if you have an operation on your neck and you're left paralyzed, if you can prove a doctor made a mistake, then you get lots of money. But if you can't prove the doctor made a mistake, you get no money. But the suffering is the same. You're still left paralyzed in both cases. So the human need is the same. So in terms of what you might call natural justice, I think this is very unsatisfactory.
Are some professions more sued than the others?
Yes, it's obstetrics is the worst one. In Britain, I mean, it is an amazing statistic. We spend twice as much on litigation over obstetric malpractice as we spend on obstetric practice, on the obstetric hospital system.
Wow.
Quite, wow. That means something's gone seriously wrong. And of course the problem is if you damage a baby, it's a lifetime of payments, and that's why it's so expensive. I think the next most expensive is neurosurgery. Again, you damage people for a long time, and particularly spinal surgery. Death is cheap. If you kill somebody, it doesn't cost that much money. It's a lot cheaper.
So it's not paid by the hospital, not paid by the doctor, but paid by NHS?
It's in effect paid by the NHS, by the government, yes.
And what happens if doctor, for example, gets sued several times?
Well, in principle, you hope that the hospital will notice this and something will be done about it. Either the doctor has to be retrained or sacked. But I don't know how often that is a problem.
You come here often,
Yes.
Which probably means that you have some nostalgia for Ukraine. How do you feel it? You are sitting in London or in Oxford, and how does it start that you start thinking, time for me to move, to go back to Ukraine?
Well, I first came here in 1992, just after independence. I always felt that Ukraine was an important country, a country with many opportunities, a young country. Every difficulty is an opportunity. I saw that neurosurgery was in a very bad state, and you could easily make rapid progress. So I used to come regularly with medical equipment. Nobody was using operating microscopes for neurosurgery when I first came here. So neurosurgery here was about 50 years out of date because of the years of isolation from with the Soviet Union. I found it exciting, a challenge. I like working outside my comfort zone. You know, I went into neurosurgery because I was attracted by risk. On the whole, the more dangerous an operation was, the more I wanted to do it. That is my nature, and an important part of surgical learning is to learn when not to do an operation. So I came for many years and I worked with one colleague, and he became very successful, very famous, and he was constantly encouraging me to help him do difficult brain operations, which I was unhappy about. But I did, and it was only after some years I realized some of these operations had gone very badly, and he had not told me. And I realized I should not be working with him, because this was a sort of Chernobyl syndrome of not telling people bad news. And he was a product of the Soviet Union time. He was about 12 years younger than me. And now when I come, I don't operate, I don't do clinical work now, but my medical contacts now are all younger. They grew up after the Soviet Union, and they're more open, and they're better at cooperating and helping each other and asking for help. But I've come to love the country in many ways. I mean, it's a country of extraordinary strengths. The resilience and inventiveness which we've seen since the full-scale invasion, was something I saw years ago, but in the sort of medical context. So I have a deep affection for the country, and now I understand very, very clearly that Ukraine is bleeding for the rest of us. You know, if Putin wins in some way, that will be a disaster for the idea of a rules-based world order, which Putin and Trump are trying to destroy. When people in England tell me, oh, you know, why are you supporting Ukraine? It's so, not many people say this, but some say Ukraine is so corrupt, you know, and Putin was provoked by NATO. Oh, you know. And I say, yes, Ukraine is very corrupt, but it'll be even more corrupt if Putin wins. And the war against Putin is also simultaneously a sort of war within Ukraine. War is a great accelerator of social change. I mean, the classic example of this is England in the Second World War, when all the soldiers came back home and said, well, you know, what were we fighting for? And that was why the National Health Service was created, out of a sense of social cohesion. And it's a great shame that there are many pressures now damaging the National Health Service. So the war is terrible, and the reconstruction of Ukraine is obviously going to be incredibly difficult. And there's a real big problem that so many of the Ukrainian diaspora who will run away will not come back. And the young people who are all learning perfect English in England will not come back, which would be very, very bad. But it has potentially a great future, and I've been going to Poland since 1990, because I had a very good friend, alas, who has now died, who had lived in England and then moved back when the wall came down to Poznan. I mean, Poland has made the most fantastic progress socially and economically. And in principle, there's no reason why Ukraine shouldn't do that as it escapes its Soviet legacy.
If you come now and, for example, you are washed, prepared, dressed for the operating room, and you just spend time there together with the doctors who are operating, do you do observations of what is wrong, and can you advise them later on how they can better organize their work?
No, not really.
No?
I mean, I was, on my last but one visit, I was in the operating theatre at the Ramadanova Institute. But my colleague there operating, who'd come to work with me in London many years ago, he's a very good surgeon. I had nothing to offer him. Sometimes I'm sent brain scans by colleagues who want my opinion about what to do or what it might be. So I can make a small, modest clinical contribution, but in terms of purely technical neurosurgery, I don't really have anything to offer. My interest is lecturing to young medical students and young doctors who are the doctors of the future, who, please God, will stay in Ukraine despite the lousy training and working conditions they have here. And my concern with them is trying to introduce them to what I think is a more progressive, more civilized kind of way of behaving as doctors, both in terms of how you talk and handle patients, and in how you make decisions and how you relate to colleagues.
I am very happy that we have an HSU, but doctors in the majority hate it totally. So what do you think about this balance between the procurer of the services, doctors who are, so to say, providing these services, the whole money question and hatred related to it?
I mean, the doctors in England all hate the NHS now. They didn't used to, I mean, but it's become so bureaucratic, and it's short of staff, short of beds. So although it's not half as bad as the situation here, there are big similarities. All healthcare systems are in crisis because of a demographic change of more and more old people and more expensive medical technology. So it's a problem everywhere. It's particularly acute in Ukraine, partly because of the war. I think there will always inevitably be conflict between doctors and managers. The managers are there really to cut costs. They might talk about efficiency, but they're really there to control costs. That's certainly the case in England. And the doctors just want to spend money and treat patients. So there'll always be conflict. I know one or two hospitals in England where, in fact, they're very good managers and they get on well with the medical staff. And the interesting thing about that is these are hospital chief executives who have been there for many, many years. In England, the average length of time of a National Health Service chief executive is about 2 or 3 years. They keep on changing, and and the doctors can't develop a working relationship with them. In theory, it should be better to improve relationships, but it is very difficult.
And the last one for today, you always return to Barman Diktat. Why?
Habit is the answer. It's very nice. It's a cool place, and Kirillo is very welcoming. So it's just a nice place.
Thank you, Henry, so much, and I'm waiting for your next visit to Ukraine.
I will be back.